Well, Zoom says it's streaming. I don't yet see it on YouTube, but for all intents and purposes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're live.
So we'll go ahead and turn our video and mute ourselves, and you guys, got a couple minutes before the official start.
Yeah, we'll wait a few minutes because
let people get on. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Shall I keep my camera on gezogen, or?
I think it makes sense for us to stay here so people know that something is about to happen.
Yes.
This is a very awkward part of Zoom.
But yeah, we're all here. We're happy for the folks who are coming in, whoever they may be.
Ja. Ich sehe, als Miriam Idel hat geschrieben wegen dein Schlafzimmer. Meine Tochter hat euch ein geiles Schlafzimmer.
Yeah, the color I chose for the room when I was able to choose it in around middle school, because I'm here staying during this period with my tate mame, is it's called Yellow Raincoat. That was the name of the color I chose. I wanted it to be a bright color to wake up to every morning. So that's why we're here in the yellow room.
Because there's a string in the living room, and you have to follow the string to find us.
Okay. Sorry.
Die Kinder.
Das ist gewesen Jeremiah, mein Eltern.
Sehr schön. Yeah. I think Miriam knew the room from having seen it in a recent video I made for the Arbetering. I've been making videos for Workers' Circle, sort of just to present the joys of Yiddish and teach a few Yiddish words in little skits and songs and things. And the latest one was set in this room. So
I only saw the first one.
Yeah, the nature one, or
nature one.
Yeah.
So now I have to go and take a look at the others.
Yeah, some catching up to do, I guess. They should be coming out every 2 weeks now, so something to look out for from the Workers' Circle.
The Workers' Circle was so set up for all of this because they've been doing it all along.
Yeah, yeah, they do wonderful things. Hello, Sora Biskovitz, someone whom I sort of taught when I was at the Yiddish Book Center when she was in the Great Jewish Books program, and is now a wonderful budding Yiddishist. So that's exciting.
Mikhl, I'm not sure if we've ever actually met in person. I feel like I know you so well.
Yeah, we have worked together sort of over the internet on some projects when I was at the Yiddish Book Center, and now on this. But no, I don't think we've ever met. So halavai someday.
Nice to meet you in this way.
Yes, indeed. I keep putting quotations around words like meet you or talk with. Like I put a lot of quotations these days because we're all sort of meeting or coming to events or attending, but only in a sort of virtual, spiritual kind of way rather than with our bodies. So a time of quotations, and then we'll get back to real life eventually.
Although there are people that I've worked with on Ingeveb, for instance, that I've been working with for years and have never actually met in person. So.
Yeah, magic of the internet. We'll be talking about magic today. That'll be a bit of magic. More old-timey magic than digital magic.
I'm thinking about whether we should get started or give it another. We'll wait until 4:05 and then we can go from there.
This is true what this commenter has written.
Yeah.
For a lot of folks, the virtual life is the real life. So that's very true. And it is a part of our modern life. Yeah, inevitably. More now for some of us than it used to be, perhaps.
Looks like there's someone with a raised hand. Let me see if I can figure out what to do about that. Oh, my notification that someone with a raised hand went away, so I don't even know who it was. But maybe Esther or Matthew, if you see who it was and want to let me know, that would be helpful. Ah, okay.
Ah. Elena Hoffenberg is a Yiddishist from Hawaii, if I'm not mistaken. I believe I've spoken with Elena on the phone. Yes, hello. Another one I've never actually met, but just over the phone and talked about Yiddish things, as one does.
It makes me feel warm and fuzzy just to read the names of people I've heard of.
Oh, definitely. Good to have friends here and people who are not yet friends. Anyone who wants to hear a Yiddish word and a bit about Yiddish theater.
Maybe we will get started. It's about time. So Shalom Aleichem, everyone, and welcome to this program. I would like to first of all thank Series at the University of Chicago and the Greenberg Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Chicago for making this event possible. And I would like to introduce our speaker for today. So the Yiddish program at the University of Chicago is very pleased to have presenting for us Mikhl Yashinsky, who was born in Detroit and educated at Harvard and is an actor, director, writer, and Yiddishist. He recently appeared with the National Yiddish Theater Volksbühne in the Drama Desk winning Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof, directed by Joel Gray, and The Sorceress, a New York Times critic's pick, for which performance he was hailed by the Times for giving keen, if malevolent psychology to the title role. His Detroit Opera House production of The Happy Prince was praised by Opera Magazine, which wrote that in a clear staging by Yashinsky, the work had a joyful presentation. Forthcoming publications include his translation of the memoirs of the theatrical pioneer Esther Rochel Kamenska, and In Einem by the Yiddish Book Center, which is a new Yiddish textbook that he co-authored and that we teach with here at the University of Chicago. He has taught the Yiddish language at the University of Massachusetts Amherst and at the University of Michigan. So we're very excited to have him talk. And before he begins, just a few technical details. This program is being recorded. It is also being live streamed to YouTube. If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. And if they're relevant to the particular moment when Mikhl is speaking, he may pause and answer them, or we may have them at the end of the session, depending on how they seem to fit in. If you are watching on YouTube, you can also post your questions there, and we will be watching that as well. Yeah, so I think that is everything. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing your presentation, Mikhl. Welcome to the University of Chicago, as it were.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here in my bedroom, talking with all of you, wherever you may be. I am going to talk about Yiddish theater and my experiences therein. And through my experiences, I'll be able to talk more broadly about interesting periods and moments and personalities of Yiddish theater historically. My start in the Yiddish theater was in college, actually, because there was a wonderful person at Harvard named Deborah Kaplan, who was doing her dissertation on Yiddish theater at the time, and I was an undergrad. And she had the idea to direct an evening of scenes from Yiddish theater. and to take a bunch of students who did not know Yiddish, of which I was one at the time, and to teach them as much as they needed to perform scenes in an authentic way and with the correct intonation and emotion and character. And I really, I saw this advertised and seized upon it and got a couple roles. And that really showed me some of the breadth and diversity and fascination of Yiddish theater. I'll show an image of me in one of those roles that I took when I was in Deborah Kaplan's Die ganze Welt ist ein Theater, The Whole World is a Theater, in which I played the role of Levi Yitzchok, a yeshiva bucher in the Dibbik, a yeshiva bucher in Grüne Felder, Green Fields, which is a pastoral romance, and also Chonen, who is this sort of romantic figure of the Dibbik who dies and possesses the woman that he loved. And we performed it at Harvard, and people were very eager to come and had full houses. And then a few months later, I think we went to a home for elderly people in the Boston area and performed for them. So here am I with Cecilia Raker, co-star, and just talking to a couple of wonderful Jewish seniors and learning from them after our performance. It's a wonderful sort of intergenerational thing as Yiddish theater. It connects us to periods bygone, works of centuries ago or of last century or a few decades ago or of current times. And it connects us with people who maybe have memories of earlier Yiddish theater or who speak Yiddish from the home. So that's been wonderful. And it's been as wonderful to meet such people as these old folks in a retirement home in Boston as it has been later in my career in Yiddish theater to meet people like we see here, people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Kate McKinnon, who plays Ruth Bader Ginsburg on SNL. They both came on one night to Fiddler auf dem Dach, to the Yiddish Fiddler on the Roof, that I performed in more recently with the National Yiddish Theater Volksbühne. And this picture, it means a lot to me to see it, because here are some personalities that I really grew up admiring. And now I had a chance to perform for them or be directed by them. In the case of Joel Gray, the wonderful actor, director who directed us in Fiddler auf dem Dach, the Yiddish translation of Fiddler on the Roof. I think I'll perform something from Fiddler. In Fiddler, I had a couple of roles. I played Nochem the beggar and Mordcha the innkeeper, a couple of men around the shtetl there with the coin cup strung around my neck. I am as Nochem the beggar, and they're standing in the middle of this crowd at the wedding that ends Act 1 as Mordcha the innkeeper. He's the sort of Badchen character at the end of Act 1 of Fiddler. A Badchen is an important figure actually for the Yiddish theater, because this was a sort of wedding jester, a person who would stand on a chair at a wedding and improvise rhymes and honor the bride and groom and make the bride weep and make the crowd weep and laugh. And he was just a wedding entertainer. It was partly something that led to the development of a Yiddish theater, because there was this authentic form of Yiddish speech making and joking and jesting. And that was sort of one of the precursors to Yiddish theater. So I was very happy to take this role, which had me playing this Badchen character. So this is the wedding speech that he gives to the bride and groom, Mikhl and Untitled, and welcomes everyone to the wedding. And yeah. Sorry. Next slide. All right, here we are. All right, so. Moirai veraboi sei, wir sind gekommen nachher, messamech zu sein, Chosen Kalle, dem Chosen Motl und die Kalle Zeitel in sehr Simche. Sollen sie sich zusammen opfern in Scholem, in Euscher und in Glück, alle weir, boinische Leulem. Amen. Und ot kommt unser beliebter Rebbe, lang leben soll boinische Leulem. Amen. Drosche Geschenk von Tate Mame Kalles Zad, lekove dem jungen Volk, anai Iberbett, 2 puchene Kischens und die 2 Leichters. Silberne, silberne, und das ist es. Und jetzt, meine Liebe, auf unser geräußere Simche, und mir sich der Monin in unsere Teire, was einen Weg auf eurem habe, unsere vergangene Obis, was haben gelebt mit Zoris in Kapzonis, und was einen abgestorben mit Zoris in Kapzonis. Aber genug gewähnt, freilich soll sein Jüden, freilich, und wie bei unser guten Freund Leser Wolf, was vermogt als Ding auf der Welt, äußere Kalle. Aber Leser Wolf hat nicht ein Beis Herz, Chalile, Behoraie, hat allein uns was für eine Drosche Geschenk geht schenken dem jungen Volk. Ja, moidre Leser Wolf. So that is Mordechai, the innkeeper's big speech at the wedding as Badchen. It was somewhat easier to do that here than it was on stage, although I have no audience, no audience physically before me, which always does help. But the difficult thing on stage was that I would perform this directly after the big wedding dance. So Mikhl and Title get married under the chuppah, and then it erupts into this really lively, high-kicking, twisting, twirling wedding dance. A section that is called Whips and Hooks. It's been called that ever since Jerome Robbins choreographed it, and we were using mostly his choreography. And it's this very strenuous dance that Jerome Robbins had taken inspiration from Hasidic weddings that he went to in Brooklyn. While he was preparing Fiddler on the Roof in the 60s, he went to Hasidic weddings and saw how the men danced and how they worked themselves into this rapturous sort of frenzy of movement. And he incorporated a lot of that into this dance, Whips and Hooks, which follows the bottle dance, which the bottle dance is very difficult. I didn't take part in that, but some say the Whips and Hooks that follows it, which the whole men's ensemble takes part in, is even more sort of difficult, or at least faster paced and a little more schwitzy. So I had to do the speech always right after that. And I could take no time because Joel Gray was always very concerned, as he ought to have been, about keeping things moving. So I had to go right from the dance into the speech, and I just had to work on my lung capacity. But it was a fun challenge. It was an amazing thing auditioning for this show, Fiddler auf dem Dach, because we had all heard that this was coming. This was the second production I took part in with the Volksbühne. We had heard about it in a big gala sort of the winter before when we were performing The Sorceress, which is another show I did with them. And we all felt, okay, well, we must try out for this because it's Fiddler on the Roof, which we all love, and in Yiddish, in the sort of language of Sholem Aleichem stories that the musical is based on. It seemed such a good idea. And then the stakes were heightened even more when we learned Joel Gray was going to direct. And I remember I was working at the Yiddish Book Center at the time, and I took a bus in to audition for the show in New York. And I was saying to a friend of mine, Stephanie Lynn Mason, who played Huddle eventually, who I was staying with for the audition, I said, I really hope that Joel Gray isn't there for the audition because I feel I'll be so scared and intimidated because I so revered him kind of growing up and seeing cabaret. And he was there. And I felt I would be so nervous the second I came in and saw him, but then he was this really sweet, smiling presence and he was laughing throughout the audition when I would do something funny, and just really bright, radiant, smiling presence that put me instantly at ease. And the whole time in Fiddler was like that. The whole 1.5 years we ended up performing it. We're supposed to run just 6 weeks, and then like a Hanukkah miracle, it ran for much longer than that off Broadway. Yes. Yes, so that's Fiddler on the Roof. I thought I'd take a little break from performing things and talk about some history and read something from Esther Rochel-Kaminska, who was considered the Mame of Yiddish theater. A Yiddish theater pioneer, grew up in a small shtetl called Porozove, and at a young age loved to go out and pick berries in her shtetl with Jewish youths and with non-Jewish youths. She talks about this in her memoir, and sings songs. And she learned songs from the non-Jewish peasant youths in the village, the songs they would sing while harvesting. And she grew up just a talented little girl, the daughter of a chazan. And her father may not have been a chazan. He may have been a shamus, more of a sexton, more of the person who took care of a shul. She had a brother who was a chazan. But anyway, this very shtetl-dik sort of existence growing up. But she had a real innate talent and was sort of discovered and moved out to Warsaw, where her sisters lived, and became a star on the Yiddish stage, a really enormous star. And started her own theater and toured around the world. And this is her looking like a very elegant dame, which she was, which she grew to be, a real name. But this I'm going to read from is a period before she was a name, really her first time appearing on stage. And it was in The Sorceress, which is a show that I'll talk about because I had the wonderful opportunity to be in that show. And that was her first time on stage. And you'll get a sense of how it was for her. A young girl who grew up in the shtetl, 20 years old, goes onto stage for the first time in Warsaw and performs in The Sorceress, Die Kischefmacherin. This is from her memoir, Derner und Blumen, or maybe Blumen und Derner. Either way, it's either flowers and thorns or thorns and flowers. And right now, somehow I can't remember which. But I'm translating this memoir for an anthology of women on the Yiddish stage that's being edited by Alyssa Quint and Miriam Chaya Siegel. And I have the happy opportunity of translating this woman's memoirs, which were published after her death in 1926 and 1927 in the newspaper Der Moment in Warsaw, a Yiddish newspaper, which today's Jewish magazine Moment is named for that old newspaper. And she has all sorts of funny, wonderful, wild stories of Yiddish theater. So this is one of them. This is from a chapter, My First Steps on Stage. She talks about getting made up by a hairdresser named Antoni, Polish hairdresser. Descending into the dressing rooms, which were located beneath the stage, we found all the actors already assembled. When they saw me, they rejoiced and came to congratulate me and wish me success. Then I was soon led to the hairdresser and makeup artist. Antoni was his name. He sat me down and began to smear my face with some kind of fat. Up until then, my face had never had anything on it besides soap and water. Then he rubbed my cheeks with the carmine I had bought, sprinkled my face with the white powder, and using a matchstick underlined my eyes with some black stuff. After reddening the edges of my nostrils and once again dumping powder over my entire face, he said, Pani gotowa, Polish for you're ready. I rose, went to look in the mirror, and let out a scream so wild that it terrified everyone around me, and myself too. I simply could not recognize myself. As was typical, the people around me had a good laugh at my expense and called me by their old name for me, Yoldivke, little Miss goody two-shoes. I pretended I did not hear them and went right on combing my hair and getting dressed. When I was finished, I sat down to wait until I was called. I cannot possibly transmit with my pen all that I went through in the succeeding minutes before the performance. One would have to go through it oneself. Only my colleagues in this line who have experienced it themselves could possibly understand it. But try to imagine the position of a 20-year-old shtetl girl taken up and put up on a Warsaw stage where once such great artists performed as Jacob Adler, Spivakovsky, Grodner, Kessler, Weinstein, the Tanzmanns, along with so many others, so many icons. And now I was to perform here, after just 2 days of rehearsal, and in such an operetta as The Famed Sorceress. I would just have to rely upon God's good graces. And she talks about the performance a little, but I want to get to some funny stuff that's in the middle of the performance. The fourth act takes place in Turkey. They dressed me in a pair of velvet pants with a sort of men's velvet jacket. I looked at myself and was put in rather a bad mood. Oy vey, I cried out. I should present myself before the public in this? But they told me I was now a singer who performs to the accompaniment of a barrel organ in the coffee houses of Constantinople. That's the scene. And this is how such people dressed. My fellow actresses also managed to calm me down by telling me I had lovely feet, and so should certainly feel bold enough to go and perform with them quite bare. The costumier dressed me, and the first violin quickly went through the last number, Bei mein Vater war ich ein einziges Kind. You notice that's in German, not Yiddish. They had to perform in German at this time because the Tsarist government in Russia had banned the performance of Yiddish language theater. So they were doing this Yiddish operetta in German, sometimes with mixed results. And that was the one number I had the weakest grasp of. Meanwhile, the third bell was ringing and I went up to the stage, heart beating madly. The fact that I barely knew what I was to do on stage, however, did not scare me so much as the pants. My word, how could they put a girl on in a pair of pants? But whether I liked it or not, I was thrust onto the set, and behind me I heard the words, on stage, anything is permitted. When I returned to my dressing room after the performance, I wondered how I was meant to wash off my makeup. But the hairdresser Antony soon came and removed it by applying a bit of pork fat to my face. I remained standing there with cheeks absolutely shining from grease. The actress Trilling noticed and said to me, powder up a bit. And so I threw some powder on and looked altogether like a miller. Anyway, she goes home with the man who would eventually be her husband, Kaminsky. He escorts her to her home where she lives with her sisters. Very end. After arriving home, I quickly went to bed, but I could not fall asleep until it was quite late. When morning came, the household did not wake me, letting me sleep in a bit. They had gained a bit of respect for their little artist. And anyhow, this was Shabbos morning, and on Shabbos, we always sleep in. Around noon, my family came in and asked me, so how did it all go, little artist? How much did you earn? But I refused to answer. So she had this wonderful experience, moment of pride, didn't want to let her meddling family necessarily ruin it by talking about it and offering their opinions, because they were quite meddling. And she really did have to be a bit of the only word I can think of is badass, which is maybe not for all audiences, but in that time, being in Yiddish theater really required quite a bit of daring do. A lot of times these people were raised in very, very frum, pious, strict environments, and being on stage was unheard of. And indeed, Esther Rachel Kaminska experienced this growing up in a very, very pious household, and going into the Yiddish theater was really quite scandalous for her family and made life very difficult for her in her early days, and until she managed to strike out on her own and manage on her own. So really quite bold and audacious sort of woman, and very intelligent and funny. And I'm enjoying translating her memoirs, which you'll be able to find eventually from Syracuse University Press when this anthology of women on the Yiddish stage is published. Yes. Let's see. Right. So another thing I wanted to talk about, just something that's revealed by that excerpt, is she says she was able to sleep in the day after because it was Shabbos morning and people nap on Shabbos and sleep in. And you might be wondering about, considering these were all Jews, how could they have been performing Friday nights? But in fact, Friday nights just shows you that the current generation hasn't fallen so far that prior generations weren't already sort of innovating and towing the line a bit when it came to strict rule and custom. Back then, Friday night was a very big night for the Yiddish theater. So it wasn't that all the Jews stayed homes and kept Shabbos necessarily. There were a lot of folks who wanted to go out Friday night and see a play in their own language, in Yiddish. And this was their way of honoring their Jewishness. And the more pious among them sometimes did finagle a kind of thing where they would pay in advance or be on a list. And that was often done as well, so they wouldn't actually have to exchange money on Shabbos. But Friday night was a big night for the Yiddish theater. Yeah. I feel like there was one other thing that I noticed that was funny, a lot of funny stuff. I love this of her face being daubed with pork fat, that being part of the makeup routine, which was probably also, shocking for her, but there was a lot that she had to get used to. Even I recently translated an excerpt where she goes to dinner, and that took a lot of getting used to because the actresses were invited out to dinner by sort of the governor of the province they were performing in Poland, who was not Jewish, and inviting them out to dinner to dine in a fancy restaurant, and it wasn't kosher. And there's a lot going on in her head, which she gets out on the page. There's one line that she keeps repeating, not as a joke, but this is just how she feels. They're traveling from shtetl to shtetl and making theater wherever they go, whether or not there is an actual theater. So often they find a horse barn to perform in. And she always has this line where she says, they got to the horse barn, they rented it out, they dragged out barrels and hay and manure, and it was already starting to look like a theater. She always has this beautifully sunny line, really making the best of some, not the greatest circumstances for putting on theater. But, the show goes on as it does here as well. It's funny having to make your bed in order to perform. That's not usually part of the performance routine, getting ready for a show, but today it was. Yes. So she talked about performing the sorceress. She played the ingenue in the sorceress, the young woman figure whose name is Mikhl. Mikhl is the sort of much put upon motherless girl who goes through a lot of struggle and misery in the course of the show. And the sorceress is the woman who basically puts her through all that misery. And the sorceress is always played by a man. And we see this throughout Esther Kaminska's memoirs. She says, I played Mikhl and Herr so-and-so played the sorceress, Mr. whoever it was. And it's always been the case. It's just a tradition of the Yiddish theater going back a long time since the play was premiered in the 1870s, written by Avram Goldfaden, who's considered the father of the Yiddish theater. So we have the mother, Esther Rochel. The father is often considered Avram Goldfaden. And yeah, it's this sort of stock character, this witch that's played by a man. You find it not only in this play, but in a lot of European dramas of the time and earlier, going back hundreds of years, where old women and witches are often played by men in what's called a dame role, which is you have trouser roles that are women who are playing men or boys. Often women played young boys, like Peter Pan, of course, is a famous example. And the dame roles, which still exist today in British pantomimes that are performed around Christmas times, those are played by men. That was something the New York Times pointed out when they came to see The Sorceress, our production of The Sorceress, which they named as a critic's pick. They said it was like a pantomime, such as they play in England during Christmas time, and we were playing in December around Hanukkah time. And they said America doesn't have a tradition of these sort of lively, silly entertainments, outlandish and fun, gaudy and colorful, that are played at Christmas time. but we should. And why shouldn't this Christmas tradition be a Hanukkah tradition? And now we have that in The Sorceress, and a classic dame role in Baba Yachne, the Sorceress. So I was happy to play this dame role. Other people who have played it over time, you have there Maurice Schwartz, who is a famous actor who led the Yiddish Art Theater in Manhattan in the Lower East Side, which was the center of Yiddish theater. 2nd Avenue was like the Yiddish Broadway. He's there, you know, looking very haggish, playing Baba Yachne, Grandmother Yachne, who's the sorceress, a fellow Oscar Solmonesco in the middle, who's playing Baba Yachne, and there's me, just with a selfie I took backstage, playing the Baba Yachne. Yeah, I think maybe my Baba Yachne was a bit sexier, maybe. I was aided a lot by the costume they had me in, which was sort of, there was a lot of, you know, padding with a lot of curvaceousness going on, and then a sort of corset to sort of cinch it all in. And it gave me a rather nice shape. And I don't know, I felt that she's already this sort of villainous character. We don't need to malign her further by making her like as ugly as possible. So why not go a bit in, you know, another direction and make her, you know, a bit glamorous in her own witchy way. So Mikhl, the director, and I were able to work on that and put together something interesting. The various phases of Baba Yachne. Me just trying on false fingernails for the first time. We did it just back in my room and seeing how they looked. Then sort of in between phase of me in Baba Yachne makeup, but in my own clothes, which I often went out in between performances if we had 2 in a day, or I would go sometimes home in them if I didn't want to go through the trouble of, you know, putting on the pork fat as the Rochel did and taking it all off. And there in full Baba Yachne drag, complete with eye painted on forehead, which I did for this scene where Baba Yachne is reading cards and divining people's futures. So that's Baba Yachne, the sorceress. And I want to show you, well, here's a few more photos of us in action in this production, directed by Mikhl, music directed by Zalman Mlotek at the Yiddish Theater, Jasmine Gorsline playing Mirele. There I'm trapping her in a coat that has a rope attached, in which I'm binding her in order to kidnap her. So just another day of being Baba Yachne. With Rachel Bachin as a sort of scheming soul sister of mine, plotting things together. Me with my fellow witches gathered around the cauldron. Yes. Lauren Zacular, Lexi Rabati, and Danny Apple there. And then me in the middle, brewing a potion. Right, so I want to perform a bit for you, the Baba Yachne. In this scene, this is her first entrance into the show. She comes on and enters the home of Basye, who you saw. Rachel Bachin was there in the red dress. And there I come in. Basye has called for me and asks me for my help in plotting something so that she can take all of her stepdaughter's money, Mirele's money, and I hatch my plan here and reveal all this trickery I'm about to do. And she's the sort of character that enjoys scheming and enjoys making people's lives hell. But you like her anyway because she has such fun doing it, and she's hopefully a sort of magnetic creature. So it was fun to play with that on stage. So here's her opening monologue. Pussy! is wieder, Basje, was hast du es mich geschickt riefen? Geh schon, geh noch redst du wie ein Kind. Noch ist wieder ungerät, dass ich die jenem Küche, wie ich stecke ein Messer in der Erde rein, mache ich etwas mit dem. Die Kinsen mache ich nur ausziehen Geld bei den Runnen, was sind verglebten drinnen. Basje. Hat dann die ganze Stadt nicht gesagt, bis du hast Kasten gehabt mit der Brömchen, als du hast immer a Küche aufgetan. Bründer müssen, was ist gewesen? Ich hab Prost herausgesehen, als a Brömchen ist ein reicher Almen, und hat mehr nicht wie einen einzigen Kind. Und die bist doch gewesen, ein Urme wüsste Almune. Hab ich dir geheißen, die soll sich reinziehen, sie im Schreines, und sich kleimerisch machen an Eingang zum Kind. Im Hanfen, in Schmächeln, sie bedienen. Und in dem ist bestanden der ganze Kirche, und weiter gar nicht. Und das, was man hat jetzt da Brömchen eingesetzt, hat doch die ganze Stadt nicht verstanden, was das bedeutet. Aber in der Emsen, was ist geschehen? Das Dreidel habe ich gedreht durch den Vetter Eljakim. Soll machen falsche Chsimes und falsche Banknoten. Und soll es ihm Tage allein hinterwerfen und ihm Tage allein hintermassern. Und es ist Tage so geschehen. Hat der Basje dreht die Bobiachnen noch ein Dreidel. Was ist wird euch heißen bei euch? Kirche! Als wäre ein Mann weggehen, hat übergeschrieben, die Kleid mit den Häusern auf deinen Nummern. Und auf dem übrigen Geld, was gehört zu seiner Tochter, hat Dichtage gemacht, war die Trappes drüber. Willst du sie Putter wehren? Das ist euch eine Kleinigkeit. Herrsche mich aus. Die schickt sie mir heim in Markerein nach Fleisch. Und das Geld, was die Wester dafür mitgeben, sollst du es ja alleine reinlegen in Käschen. Und Tage, meine Baby, bei ihr zurück rausnehmen, sie soll es gar nicht bemerken, verstehst du? In der Nacht, also wie es wird, kommen in Markerein und wird nicht huben, sie wird zullen für ein Fleisch, hat sie doch schon mindestens meure Huben nach Hause zu kommen. Warum, sie kennt dich doch schon, was für ein Schlag du bist. Nun, danach, so wie sie wird stehen auf dem Markt, will ich schon hinterkommen. In welch ein Wissen, was ich habe mit dir zu tun. Nu, halt mich du mir nicht auf, weil ich will nicht, dass mit soll mich du treffen. Warum durchdenken kann ich in der ganzen Küche, verstehst du? Nu, sei gesinnt und hab Seichel. So. Aber ja. A sort of remarkable circumstance led me to audition for that show. The first time we did it in 2017, that was my first professional experience direct on the Yiddish stage. And I was working at the Yiddish Book Center at the time, and a group of artists came seeking inspiration for their various creative endeavors, and they came from the organization Reboot, and I was one of the people sort of on faculty helping them to discover things and find resources for them at the Yiddish Book Center. Some of them were interested in the Yiddish occult, what connections Yiddish had to the occult and to superstition and magic and all sorts of things like that. So I was finding resources for them and finding old spells and records of amulets and all kinds of things. But then I also remembered there's this play called The Sorceress, so maybe I'll show them some stuff about that. So I went and looked up The Sorceress, finding resources and plot information, stuff like that I could share with these artists who didn't know too much about Yiddish, but they were interested, and saw that the Volksbühne was having auditions for The Sorceress for an upcoming production. So I printed that out, that audition notice, and brought it into my session with them. And I said, well, here, some of you are actors, and you should go and audition for the show. And you live in New York anyway, and why not try out? And they thought this was ludicrous, that they, who didn't speak Yiddish, although most of the casts of these shows that the Volksbühne puts on are not Yiddish speaking, and they learn in the context and the of doing the show. But anyway, they were not into the idea of my of going and auditioning for it, them, but they said, Mikhl, you must go and audition. Although I was just working as a research fellow at the Yiddish Book Center at the time. And the whole weekend that they were at the Yiddish Book Center, they kept pressuring and even talked to my supervisors, asking if Mikhl could get time off to go to New York and audition, and being, you know, really mixing in a way that amused me, but I was sort of not taking seriously, but then I got to take it more and more seriously. Anyway, I ended up taking a bus down to the city and auditioning, and with a Yiddish song that I found in the sort of a basement vault of the Yiddish Book Center, just on old crumbling bits of sheet music, and audition with this. And then on the bus ride back, I remember Jamie Beth Margolis, the casting director, calling me and saying, I know we gave you those sides to prepare for the callback. I was on my bus back to New York, and for these other characters, but could you also prepare the sides for the sorceress herself? And this was a wunder to me. I didn't imagine having that role, the title role, in my first outing in professional Yiddish theater, but I thought I'd give it a go. I went to a thrift shop that weekend in Western Mass and bought a skirt so I could wear a skirt at the callback, because I thought, why not? If a lady is trying out for this role, she'll probably be wearing a skirt so she can, you know, swish it around and engage it in that sort of witchy sort of way. And I thought, why shouldn't I at least have that advantage? So, yeah, and got the role, and that was a wonderful thing, and I'm very glad to have done that. Somebody asks me about a Grace Paley story that has to do with Yiddish theater, and I've read Grace Paley, but I don't know that story, and I must read it. So I'll put that on my reading list. So thank you for that, Lawrence. Yes. Right. Things. No. Share screen. I want to do some more performing or something of the kind. Oh. Kim. This is, I'm sorry. Oh damn. Not the easiest thing always, these things. Oh boy. I want to one moment. View. I want to see these slides. Navigator. Show me the navigator. Okay, that makes things a lot easier. All right. This is an actual clip. I'm not allowed to show much from the Sorceress of actual performance because of union rules, but I can show this tiny clip of me trapping Mirele in the marketplace, just so you get a taste of what it looked like on stage. So let's see. Kim Zimir in Stieb hat's in der Kim Zimir heim Kim Zimir in Stieb hat's in der Kim Zimir heim. That's sort of a famous song from the show. Kim Zimir, come to me. Starts out tricking her, pretending she's this kindly old Bubba, eventually reveals herself as the witch, and eventually leads her back to her lair, which is almost like a brothel, really. It seems like she is sort of unfortunately, a sex trafficker, really. She eventually sells Mirele into what seems like sexual slavery in Turkey. A lot going on in that play. Yeah. Another play I wanted to talk about that I've not taken part in, but I thought it relevant to these times we're in right now. This one is a play that looks at social issues in a much more serious way than The Sorceress does. The Sorceress is really all about entertainment. And this play, Mississippi, is about entertainment, as all plays are, as well as education, and really talking about problems that humanity is faced with, offering solutions, offering hope, shining a light. That's what Leib Malach's Mississippi does, which I've recently come upon, and I've been much aided by Alyssa Quint, whom I mentioned earlier. She's researched this play a lot and has a lot of wonderful resources to share about it. This is a play that talks about the problem of the scourge of anti-Black racism in America. And it's a Yiddish play about that topic. And you might be surprised by that. But in fact, the Yiddish theater commented on all kinds of things, not just, as it was said, the Yiddish Gas, the Yiddish street, the Jewish sphere, commented on issues that were present in the world, and especially inhumanity and prejudice and racism, because the Jews were faced with these sorts of issues wherever they were in the world as well. So the best of them had great compassion for fellow sufferers of persecution and of ethnic hatred. And this guy, Leib Malach, and that was his stage name, it means Leib Angel. Leib Saltzman, I believe, was his birth name, wrote this play, Mississippi, about the Scottsboro Boys trial. So a group of African-American boys who were on a train and got into a sort of scuffle with these white youths who ended up instigating this thing whereby these two white girls on the train falsely accused the Scottsboro Boys, because it was in Scottsboro, Alabama, although the play is called Mississippi, accused the boys of rape, and 9 boys, trials, lynch mobs, terrible, terrible things, all of which, and false accusations and imprisonment on no grounds. All of which Leib Malach brings into this really incisive, innovative play, Mississippi, which premieres in the 1930s in Warsaw. This is Leib Malach, who you see here, hopefully. And this is a cover of the play when it was translated into Esperanto and published. Esperanto, of course, the language, our artificial language invented by Ludwig Zamenhof, who grew up in Bialystok and was himself a native Yiddish speaker, and bases some of the structures and vocabulary of Esperanto on Yiddish. Eventually this play is translated into Esperanto, but that's not the main point. The main point is that it was this worthwhile, interesting play that comments on these issues, comments usefully, I think, on anti-Blackness in America, and comes to some important realizations and educates audiences about it, especially audiences who may not have known about it. There's this quote that Alyssa Quint, I found in an article of hers, a journalist, Y. Gottlieb. Now I'm going to read a different quote by a different journalist. This is a journalist, Moises Kanfer, writing for a Polish Jewish newspaper in 1937 about a production of the play in Krakow. It's no surprise that a Jewish author wrote this. Aren't Jews in many European countries these days just like the Black people of America? Aren't we fighting for the most primitive right to live? Then do not be surprised that the one who wrote a play about the tragic misery of American Blacks is a Jew. And that line stuck out to me, fighting for the most primitive right, the simplest, most basic right to live, which is what the Black population of America is fighting for today. That's really what the slogan Black Lives Matter is all about. So I wanted to perform just a little excerpt of this play and to show you what it's like, this Yiddish play, Mississippi. There's a poster for, I believe its premiere production at the Jung Theater in Warsaw, which was an experimental Yiddish theater, directed by a guy called Mikhl Brandt. And there it is, Mississippi. This is the speech of one of the prisoners, one of the men who is wrongly convicted and imprisoned. And he hears that someone may deny, that one of the accusers may deny what has taken place, and they might all be set free. But he has a second thought about this, which he expresses in this speech. Yeah. Und als sie soll erzählen dem Emes, wird man denn glauben? Und als man soll viele freilassen, wird man denn nicht lynchen? Besser schon da sitzen, eher zerrissen werden von die Weiße. Ich habe einmal gesehen, wie man hat gehabt, einem von unseren Leid, der Fahrer, was hat gegangen mit der Hund. Ihr Herr, der Hund, efter hat Bräut gefällt. Efter ist ein Kind krank gewesen. Es kann nicht treffen. Ist wie viel wert der Hund? Noch mehr sagen $1. Hat man ihn zugebunden zum Wedel von einem Pferd, einem wilden Mexikaner Pferd, und also hat sich noch geschleppt in Felder rein. Und geschlagen hat man. Ein abgeschwundener Ochs ist schon gewesen, wenn man hat ihm zugebunden zu einem Baum, und weiße Weiber haben auf ihm gegossen mit Naft. Und wenn die Flammen haben schon über ihm geknackt, haben die Ku Klux Klan gehalten brennende Kezelem ihm und gesungen darum ihm das schwarze Tlielied. Ihr habt es einmal gehört, das schwarze Lied? Then there's a recitative, sort of the choir from off stage sings this hanging song. But I didn't want to do that song because it's really terrible and just a white mass shouting and for blood, really. And it works in the context of the play, I'm sure, but I thought right now I'd end with a more, this part of the talk would end with a more hopeful part of the play, which is the final song. He puts in a lot of songs, actually, and it ends with a protest song. Maybe not unlike a protest song you'd hear on the streets today in any major city in America. It's come to a climax, the play. They're trying to break free of the police wagon and a scene of great chaos. And then you hear this chorus rising, and that's how the play ends. And it would have been sung with a tune, but I don't know it, so I'm just going to read it. By Mississippi in dem Dorm, dorten blutigen die Quorum, dort wellen glien Fonnen und Monnen und Monnen. By Mississippi in dem Dorm, dort schließen Orms sich zu Orms und von Zorn aufgebräusten Flammenfäusten. Flammenfäusten. Quite an interesting play. All of this done in Yiddish, this story told in Yiddish. All of the characters speak in Yiddish, whether they're white or black or Jewish or Gentile, it doesn't matter. They're all speaking Yiddish. And played by Yiddish-speaking Jewish actors. So you might be wondering about that. They were made up, I believe, with blackface. So you know, this was the convention of the time, and in Warsaw it was done this way, and it would be too horrible to see it done that way today, because it's a different time and a different place. And but maybe some way, somehow, this could be performed, you know, as it ought to be performed according to today's accepted standards, which are important ones. So interesting stuff there. Maybe I'll look at the Q&A and
Mikhl, I'm happy to jump back in and field the questions for the Q&A.
yeah.
So we have 2 questions, and in addition, if anyone has more questions, feel free to type them in as we go. And I also have a few questions to ask myself, so we'll get it started. But I'll start with there's a question here from Pammy Brenner. Was your relationship to Yiddish born out of your involvement in Yiddish theater, or did you have an independent connection to the language and culture that eventually converged with your interest in theater?
Yeah, well, interestingly, I had a grandmother in whom these streams converged in her own person. My grandmother, Elizabeth Elkin Weiss, Olea Sholem, together with my grandfather, Reuben Weiss, they were both actors. That was their profession in Detroit. And they acted on stage and in early radio and on television. And they were also deeply fascinated by Yiddish. And my grandmother, when I was growing up, led a Yiddish club at our local JCC, and she would perform in Yiddish and had Yiddish books and movies to share with me. So I really got a lot of that, both the interest in Yiddish language and culture and in theater as a profession from her, and in the feasibility of theater as a profession, which, you know, some people grow up with that, and not possibly imagining that that could be a profession. But I grew up with the sense that my grandparents had done that as a profession and raised 5 kids. And that's something, you know, that could be a person's work. And not just a person's passion. It could be both. So I'd say sort of all of that came from her, and then I kind of discovered it from my own. Yeah, but there was I had inherited a Yerusha, an inheritance of this sort of thing. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question from Cameron Bernstein. She says, I've been translating a play by Paula Prulitzky and in passing, a biography of her husband, Noach Polutsky, mentions that Paula became acquainted with Esther Rochel Kamenska, who later performed in the Yiddish dramas Paula wrote under her husband's influence. So she wants to know if you've ever heard of Paula or the Prolitskys in Kaminska's writing, if she comes up at all.
She has not come up yet. I'm still finishing. And she doesn't actually get to covering the entirety of her career, I believe, because she died in the midst of writing it. So she doesn't get to everything. Like the last entry is really, it's not really an ending. I think maybe she did finish rewriting it, but it wasn't published. Anyway, no, I've not encountered this, but hopefully.
Esther Rochel Kamenska's daughter was Ida Kamenska, is that right?
That's right. Ida Kaminska was equally famous, even more famous in the non-Yiddish world, because she acted in non-Yiddish movies in Czech and was nominated for an Oscar, actually, for Best Supporting Actress for you know, The Shop on the Corner, or whatever that movie was called, this Czech movie that was up for foreign film, and she was nominated actually for Best Supporting Actress. So.
We have, let's see, a question from Eric Gordon. What's coming up in your future as a Yiddish actor?
Well, it's really as sort of nebulous as anyone's right now who works in theater, because theaters are not open and there's no signs of them opening anytime soon. But one does what one can in these strange times and writes and imagines and collaborates with friends on projects. And so nothing is certain right now, but I certainly hope to act in more Yiddish theater, possibly direct, which I've done also. Yeah, but it's all to be seen, because right now is a bit of a sad time for theater. Everything's dark. Yeah.
Although you've been doing these videos for the
yes,
work.
I've been doing, it's been one creative outlet during this time, is these sort of videos for the Workers' Circle, which you can find on the Workers' Circle Facebook or YouTube or Instagram, wherever you are. Every 2 weeks, posting these videos that sort of present Yiddish in a joyful way and a creative way, hopefully, and teach a thing or two, and a way to make some art in Yiddish and show the vitality of Yiddish.
We have some more questions here. And also I have a question for you, which is related to what you just spoke about. So maybe I'll ask my question and then have these two. So my question is, how is teaching related to theater for you? I know you've done both. And do you incorporate a lot of theater into your teaching? Do you think about teaching differently because you work in theater?
Yeah, I have incorporated into my Yiddish teaching, and I think it's a really wonderful thing to do, actually, which I talked about that example of being in college and acting in that play directed by Deborah Kaplan. I was sort of inspired by the way she did that and ended up doing it myself with a group of, I worked as a Spanish teacher for a while at my alma mater high school, the Franco-Jewish Academy in Detroit, and ended up getting a grant for the school from the Fishman Foundation for Yiddish Culture to direct a play in Yiddish with the students there, students who did not know Yiddish. And we did this play entirely in Yiddish called Noch 12 bei Nacht. And I've used theater in classes too, teaching Yiddish, as I did at the University of Michigan. To me, you have in a Yiddish play words already written in the most artistic, but also the most idiomatic way by native Yiddish speakers and authors who were trying to write in the rhythms of people such as they encountered in their lives. And it's this wonderful sort of time capsule of how people talked, or, you know, often heightened for the drama, but you have it all there, sort of this capsule of Yiddish life and speech and dialogue. So if a student who is studying Yiddish memorizes, really takes time to incorporate and get into their blood scenes from Yiddish theater, it's doing a lot for them all at once. It's training them in the rhythms of this language and idiomatic expressions and ways to make yourself understood and to express all sorts of passions and wonderful things in Yiddish in an authentic, in an idiomatic way, colloquial way. So I think it's great for that. And even if you don't know that much, you can memorize. If you're a beginner, you can memorize a monologue or a scene, and that can give you stuff you'll later build on. So you can sort of get the speech first and then later add to it grammar and sense of vocabulary and everything, but you've already have it sort of in your bones, the rhythms kind of, and the way people speak. And that's a really useful thing.
So we have a question from Sarah Biskowitz. How does nostalgia influence the contemporary world of Yiddish theater? And how do you think the next generation of young Yiddishists like you will change Yiddish theater?
Nostalgia is an important force. We have people nostalgia even for times and places that they never experienced in their lives. People can feel it. People came to Fiddler and said, although it was a very bare stage that we had, it was sort of a very minimalist kind of production. Visually, they felt like they were there, and they felt like they were transported to the shtetl and to the world of their great-grandparents, and they were crying because of it. They spent the whole production, all 3 hours crying, which I imagine would really dry you out. But that was, an important thing for people and a way people connected to it, and not a bad thing. And, it probably led them on to a deeper exploration, hopefully, of that world and of the language. And I think for many it did. Many came out of seeing that show who had never had any experience with Yiddish culture and language and said, I want to go start taking Yiddish now. And, so there should be more of that and more engagement and deeper engagement. And how will my generation change the Yiddish theater? Hopefully keep innovating and taking chances. Something that I've been learning about this play, Mississippi, is that it was done in a theater that considered itself, and it's right there actually on the poster in Yiddish, an experimental theater. These were not people who were just interested in putting on works of the past and doing them in the expected way. They were interested in writing for our times, writing on new themes, and doing them in a very experimental way. This Mississippi was performed on 3 stages simultaneously, and it's sort of like an immersive theater experience would be today. They were doing it then in the 30s. And when one character was in one stage, the lights would go up on him, the lights would go off, they'd go up on another character. So you'd be having this interplay between stages. And to me, this was like, just a wonderful thing to read about. And I think we should continue bringing that spirit, that avant-garde, experimental, pushing things forward, taking chances, imagining. Hopefully we do a lot of that. Yeah.
We have a question about, are there other plays like Mississippi? Are there other plays about the African-American experience in the Yiddish theater corpus?
Yes. Another play put on by this Jung Theater in Warsaw, because they also put on translations of world theater into Yiddish. They did Eugene O'Neill, All God's Children Got Wings. That's one. I'm sure there are many others. I don't know too much about all of them. And I would like to go and study and learn more and find more examples. But we do have a gem, I think, in this Mississippi.
I know that Rachel Rubenstein has written an article about stagings of Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Yes, which was very popular as a novel in Yiddish, translated into Yiddish. And yeah, you're right. That was also seen on stage.
We have one more question here, which is from Daniel Greenberg. That he asks, I've just started learning Yiddish, so he doesn't know if this is a question that he should know the answer to already, but what dialect of Yiddish does modern Jewish theater use? Does it attempt to be modern or neutral? Do you try to mirror the dialect that might have been used when it was written? So how do you handle questions of dialect?
Mm-hmm. It varies from show to show, and we used a different one for the Sorceress than we did for Fiddler, than we did for the reading of the Golem that I was in by Hay Leivik. But the standard dialect for theatrical performance in Yiddish is called Bina Yiddish, which is stage Yiddish. The Volksbina is the people's stage, so Bina means stage, but it's based, I believe, on sort of southeastern Romanian dialects of Yiddish, because that's sort of where the Yiddish theater was founded by Avram Goldfun, was from Romania, and that's where a lot of the early troops were based. And so sort of based on that dialect of Yiddish. So typically not the Klal Yiddish or the standard Yiddish that you'd hear being taught in a classroom today, but a different dialect.
We have a question about where we can find a copy of Mississippi if people want to read it themselves.
Yeah, well, it's not published in English. There's no translation published. I believe Alyssa Quint is working on one, so maybe that will come out eventually. But you can read it in Yiddish. If you can read Yiddish, you can go to the Yiddish Book Center website and type in the name of Leib Malach, and you'll find a huge volume of all about his life and containing all of his works, like 500 pages or something. But in that book is the entirety of Mississippi. Yes. If we have time, I'll perform one more little song.
Sure, that would be terrific. We'll
to close us out.
And then and then I'll say my thank yous afterwards. So you go ahead and perform your song, and then afterward I will appropriately thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so share screen. Okay. Bobby Yachna is not given a song in the context of the show. She doesn't have a song of her own, which I mean, she has songs with other people, duets and ensembles and moments of music, which is fun, but she doesn't have her own big number. But the Soviet Yiddish theater, the Moscow State Yiddish Theater in the 1920s did a production, a sort of modernist production of the Kishef Macharin, the Sorceress, and gave her a song. And their song is really about how much she loves money and how she'll do anything for money. And to me, it's sort of very in line with Soviet values, sort of very kind of anti-capitalist, anti-superstitious, anti-religion, whatever it is. But they put a lot on Bobby Yachna. And this is her song where she says, I'm Bobby Yachna, and here's what I am. And I never performed this because it wasn't in our production. I brought it up with our musical director, wonderful musical director, Zalman Mlotek, and said, look at this really old cylinder recording from the 1920s I found of Binyamin Zuskin, who was eventually murdered by Stalin, along with many other Yiddish artists, executed by Stalin's government. Anyway, I said, how about we do this in the show? And he said, it's really cool, but it doesn't sound at all like Goldfun, who composed the original music, so we're not going to do it. But this is my bedroom, and I can do it. It's my party, and I'll bob it if I want to. So here it is. Ich bin Bobejacht, ich bin schein du. Die Kischefmacherin ist du. In a Gitarre, in a Masel dicker Schuh. Ich bin, oh, ich bin. Hazogerin, a Klugerin, a Hellserin, a Sternserin, a Sprecherin, a Trefferin. A Bube jachne in Safgurer Welt. A bi Parnusse kriegen a bi Geld. Hoi Geld. Ich war verkurt, ich latte so ich drehe und ich pira schlag ich nes batug und treff bei Nacht. A Bube jachne in Safgurer Welt. Abi Parnusse kriegen abi Geld. Heun Geld. Ich bin Bobejacht, ich bin schein du.
Thank you so much. It was terrific. The lecture was terrific and the performances were excellent, and it was so wonderful to have you here, as it were, to talk to us. And I also just want to take a minute to thank Esther Peters and Matthew Weflin from the series for all of their help in making this event possible. And thank you to everyone who came. This is such a pleasure to be able to get together and learn from you.
A pleasure for me, so thank you very much. Herzlichen Dank.